Harold had been a light sleeper ever since Margaret passed 3 years ago. The house seemed too quiet without her gentle breathing beside him, and every creak of the old Victorian home would wake him. Tonight was no different until the soft knock came at his front door. 2 in the morning was an unusual time for visitors, but Harold had raised 2 children mostly on his own after Margaret's first battle with cancer took her strength for those difficult years. He knew that sometimes people needed help at the strangest hours. Pulling on his worn flannel robe, Harold made his way downstairs. His knees protested the journey, but at 62 he was grateful they still carried him. The porch light revealed a young woman, perhaps in her early 30s, shivering despite the late spring evening. Her auburn hair caught the light, and something about her face struck him as familiar, though he couldn't place where he might have seen her before. "I'm so sorry to bother you this late," she said through chattering teeth. "My car broke down just up the road and my phone is dead, and I know this sounds crazy, but when I saw your house something told me you might help." Harold didn't hesitate. "Of course, dear, come inside before you catch your death of cold." The warmth of the kitchen seemed to embrace her as she stepped through the doorway. Harold noticed her clothes were damp from the evening mist, and her shoes looked like they had walked further than just up the road. "Let me put on some coffee," he said, moving toward the old percolator that Margaret had loved. "Or tea if you prefer." "Coffee would be wonderful, thank you," she replied, still wrapping her arms around herself. As Harold busied himself with the familiar ritual of making coffee late at night, he studied her reflection in the kitchen window. There was something in her posture that reminded him of his own daughter Sarah when she was troubled. The way she held her shoulders just a little too straight, as if bracing against the world. "I'm Harold," he said as the coffee began to percolate. "Harold Morrison." "Elizabeth," she replied. "Elizabeth Chen, though most people call me Lizzie." Harold set 2 of Margaret's favorite mugs on the kitchen table, the ones with the small painted roses that had somehow survived all the moves and all the years. "Morrison," Lizzie repeated softly. "That name does sound familiar." Harold poured the coffee and added cream to both cups the way Margaret always liked it. He had learned over the years that when someone showed up at your door in the middle of the night, they usually needed more than just help with a broken car. "Have we met before, dear?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her. Lizzie wrapped her hands around the warm mug, and Harold noticed her wedding ring was missing, though there was a pale band of skin where one had been. "I don't think so, but my grandmother used to tell me stories about a man named Morrison who helped her family when I was very young. She said she lived in this neighborhood decades ago." Harold felt a gentle stirring in his memory. "What was your grandmother's name?" "Rose Chen, though back then she would have been Rose Liu." Lizzie said she came here from Taiwan in the 70s with my grandfather and my mother, who was just a baby. The coffee cup paused halfway to Harold's lips. Rose Liu. He remembered now. A young family new to the neighborhood, struggling with English and unfamiliar customs. Margaret had been the one to reach out first, as she always did, but Harold had helped fix their leaky roof one autumn and had driven Rose to the hospital when little Amy had gotten sick. "Your mother would be Amy then," Harold said with a smile. Lizzie's eyes widened. "You do remember them?" "Your grandmother made the most incredible dumplings," Harold said. "She brought them over every Chinese New Year for about 10 years until they moved to California." Harold could see tears gathering in Lizzie's eyes now. "Grandmother always said there was an angel family on Maple Street who helped them when they first arrived. She said she told me that if I was ever lost I should look for people like the Morrisons." The kitchen fell quiet except for the gentle bubbling of the percolator finishing its cycle. Harold reached across the table and patted Lizzie's hand the way he had done countless times for his own children when they were hurting. "What brings you back here, dear?" he asked. "Besides the broken car." Lizzie took a shaky breath. "I'm getting divorced," she said simply. "I've been driving for 2 days just trying to figure out what comes next, and when my car died I looked up and saw this street sign and remembered grandmother's stories." Harold nodded, understanding. He had learned that sometimes the best thing you could offer someone was simply to listen. "Divorce is never easy," he said, "even when it's the right thing to do." "Everyone keeps asking me what I'm going to do now," Lizzie continued, "as if I should have it all figured out, but I feel like I'm starting over at 33 and I don't even know who I am without being married." Harold refilled their coffee cups. "You know," he said, "when Margaret first got sick I thought I knew exactly who I was and what our life would look like, but sometimes life has different plans and we have to learn to be okay with not knowing what comes next." Lizzie looked at him with the kind of attention that comes from recognizing wisdom born of experience. "How did you do it?" she asked. "How did you keep going when everything changed?" Harold considered this. It was a question his children had asked him and one he had asked himself many times over the years. "I suppose I learned that being lost isn't the same as being broken," he said. "Sometimes when we don't know where we're going we pay better attention to where we are right now." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. The kitchen clock ticked steadily and somewhere in the distance a train whistle echoed across the sleeping town. Harold had forgotten how peaceful these late-night conversations could be. Margaret used to say that 2 in the morning was when people told the truth because they were too tired to pretend. "Your grandmother was a wise woman," Harold said. "Eventually she understood that kindness creates a kind of invisible thread that connects people across time. She always said kindness was never wasted." Lizzie agreed. "Even when you think no one notices." Harold smiled. Rose was right about that. As the coffee grew cool, Harold found himself thinking about the strange way life circled back on itself. Here was Rose's granddaughter sitting at his kitchen table just as lost as Rose had been all those years ago, but for entirely different reasons. "You know what I think?" Harold said. "I think your grandmother sent you here tonight." Lizzie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "That sounds like something she would do." Harold stood up and walked to the kitchen drawer where Margaret used to keep the important phone numbers. He pulled out a small address book worn soft with years of use. "There's a woman named Carol Peterson who runs a women's shelter about 20 minutes from here," he said. "She's helped a lot of people figure out their next steps and she's always looking for volunteers if you decide you want to stay in the area for a while." Lizzie took the address book. "You really think it would be okay for me to stay here?" "Dear Harold said, this neighborhood has always been a place where people land when they need to catch their breath and figure things out, and there's a little apartment above the bakery on Main Street that's been empty for months." Harold could see something shifting in Lizzie's posture. The rigid bracing was softening into something that looked more like possibility. "I should probably call a tow truck for my car," she said. "In the morning," Harold replied. "Tonight you're my guest and there's a perfectly good couch in the living room if you don't mind sharing the space with an old man who gets up early to make breakfast." Lizzie laughed and Harold realized it was the first time she had smiled since arriving. "Grandmother always said the Morrisons were angels," she said. Harold shook his head. "Just people who remember what it feels like to need help," he replied. As Harold showed Lizzie to the living room and brought her an extra blanket and pillow, he thought about Rose and how proud she would be of her granddaughter's courage. Starting over took a special kind of bravery, especially when you were doing it alone. "Harold," Lizzie called softly as he was heading back upstairs. "Yes, dear." "Thank you for answering the door." Harold paused at the bottom of the staircase. "Sweetheart," he said, "some doors are meant to be answered." As Harold settled back into bed he found himself thinking about Margaret and how she would have loved meeting Rose's granddaughter. She always said that kindness was like planting seeds you might never see grow, but they would bloom somewhere down the line when someone needed them most. Tonight Harold had seen one of those seeds bloom, and in the morning he would make his famous pancakes and help Lizzie call about her car and maybe drive her over to meet Carol Peterson. Because that's what neighbors did for each other, especially on Maple Street, where angels came disguised as ordinary people, and kindness created invisible threads that connected hearts across generations.